Nice.
We have the Fishkill Support Center of Jehovah's Witnesses coming back for project review. I will recuse myself again from any discussion on this matter. It seemed like after the public hearing, comments were made. I couldn't hear any of it, but I could tell there was a gap between when I didn't hear people speaking anymore and when I came back in the room. So I'm assuming there was some further discussion about the
Quite a bit of
project.
substantial discussion after the comments were received. But
Okay, that's what I thought.
that's about as much as I'll tell you.
Good, because I don't want
Watch
to know
it on
anymore.
TV.
I don't want to watch.
We need the ratings.
I don't want to watch the TV. All right, I'll be back.
Item 10 on the agenda tonight, Fishkill Support Center of Jehovah's Witnesses Site Development Plan. Board to review submission made by the applicant's representative on April 27, 2022. Before I turn it over to you, we are running short on time tonight. I want to make sure that we're very thorough. We are going to spend some time here. But I'd like to ask you to first update the board on what has changed in the most recent site plan. And then I'd like you to go through your letter dated April 27, 2022, in which you provided a discussion of some of the key items that had been brought up to date prior to tonight's hearing. And I'd like the applicant to go item by item on those. So I know you mentioned some of the concerns and potential mitigation measures. I think it's very important that we discuss those items and whether they are to the satisfaction of this board or whether additional measures could be provided. So I'd like to take that step. And then I think what I would be looking for, and we could talk about some of the items that were brought up tonight, I think for the next meeting, we probably want a similar approach of taking some of the comments that were brought up tonight, the key topics, and we could talk about those and have you do the same approach for the next meeting.
Very
So I think that kind of just summarizes where I think we need to go for tonight's meeting. And so at this point, I'll turn it over to you to describe some of the changes that have been made to the site plan since our last meeting.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll be as succinct as we can be. Our civil engineer will go through some of the particulars on the site plan adjustments.
Yeah, I'll just briefly summarize. So the main changes that we made to the site plan since the last submission, we had received a previous comment. We were showing some excess fill based on the grading work, and we regraded the site such that there's no net export of soil. So we added a couple feet of fill to the sports fields. So what we're showing now is balanced grading, no export of soil. And then not to really get in the weeds of the technical stormwater details, but there was 2 comments from the town engineer regarding stormwater. And basically what we had done to address those concerns, we added a small depression close to the existing wetlands, essentially to add some additional storage area, which kind of balances out the attenuation that we were assuming from the wetlands. And just for the board's input, basically the engineer had come back and said that the changes that we made were satisfactory, and there was no further stormwater comments.
Okay, I guess at this point, they've referenced your letter, John, so maybe I'll let you address the comments in your letter before we go back to their memo where they address some of the public hearing comments. So John, I'll let you go through your memo.
Yeah, he is correct. They have addressed the remainder of the stormwater comments that we had. So as long as the layout of the site or the grading of the site remains the same, they will not need to update the SWIP that they have submitted. I think the 2 main items in our letter that we'd like to touch on with the board is, one, the traffic study scope that was mentioned previously. We provided a scope and the applicant provided a scope that was very similar to our scope, but we felt it was missing 2 critical items, one being a crash analysis and the second being an assessment of the Route 9D I-84 intersections in addition to the intersections that they had identified. So we feel that if they agree to add those to their scope, then it's appropriate for the board to authorize them to go ahead and get that study done. It sounds like they've already agreed to that and started the study, so I don't know if it makes sense to authorize it. It sounds like they just assumed they were going to do it anyway, and it's underway. The other item was, in their responses to public comment, they did make some, they alluded to the fact that they may be able to adjust the location or the orientation of some of the ball fields and meditation areas to appease some of the public concern. So if they're going to do that, it sounds like they're potentially good ideas, but that's something we would obviously need to look at before we'd make any recommendations to the board as to whether they make sense or not, because we don't know if that results in additional grading, less grading, the same amount of grading. I would imagine it wouldn't change much, but it's obviously something that we would need to look at.
Okay, so Dominic, we provided a scope, or CPL provided a scope for the traffic study. The applicant provided one. There were some slight differences. It did seem like, and I guess I can ask the applicant at this point, you said you had started a traffic study. Is that scope that you're using the scope that CPL provided?
The additional requests in CPL's scope, we have now requested of our consultants. So it will be included in the final study.
So, Dominic, there's no authorization at this point. They've concurred that they will follow that scope that has
Yeah,
been provided by our consultants, so.
As they say, the proof is in the pudding. When the traffic study comes back, we'll make sure that it complied with not only the scope that they prepared, but also the comments that CPL had provided as well. But ultimately, it'll be up to the board to accept the findings of that traffic study.
Okay, so there's no action at this point. They've agreed to follow that scope, so.
Correct.
We'll just wait to see what they provide, and our consultant would then review it.
Correct.
Okay. So, I think you were out of the room when I mentioned this, Dominic. My suggestion would be, at this point, the applicants provided a memo on dated April 27th, where they provided discussion of some of the key items that have been brought up prior to tonight and prior to some of the emails received. My suggestion was to go through that item by item and have the board's opinions on offered mitigation measures. And then at the end of that, we could circle back to some of the items that were brought up tonight that would be appropriate for a follow-on memo for the next meeting. I believe that would be the appropriate approach at this point. Would allow us to see what they've offered. We can offer some suggestions as they go topic by topic. That was.
Yeah, I think it's good as far as it goes. I mean, the public hearing itself is still open, so this is like if you will, would be kind of an interim step, because there may be additional public comment regarding traffic or any of the other items that the public's entitled to speak on. But I think it's kind of, if you will, it's kind of like checking where the applicant is identifying relative areas of public concern and perhaps getting input from the board at this point. But it would be premature to, I think, head to any kind of determination on
Sure.
any one of these issues, because the public hearing is still open.
Sure, and I think it would just be appropriate for them to go through. They've, gone topic by topic here. I think they have about a dozen topics here. To go through each one, they've offered some potential mitigation measures. I think it'd be appropriate for them to discuss it and have our board decide whether they believe any other additional mitigation measures may be appropriate. So, if you may, if you can go through the memo that
Be
you
happy
do
to.
have. I think traffic was the first item.
Yes, it was. And we believe that in good faith, we've started that study. We will include the comments that were requested in addition to what we had in our scope, and we'll see what the findings produce. I think it's wise to, in the interest of the neighbors, is to extend that as it's been requested to extend and look at the crash studies as well. We'll go on to lighting.
Actually, before we do that,
Sure.
you briefly mentioned parking in that portion of the
Oh,
memo.
yes. Yes,
And
thank you.
There's been some substantial comment about the number of spaces. Is there an opportunity to additionally remove some spaces. I mean, we're down to 247. Is the applicant willing to consider a further reduction? Because from my understanding from previous responses, there was a statement that, you know, most of the people using the site would be from the, you know, surrounding immediate areas. So I'd like to know from the applicant their feelings on additional reductions in parking to support your statement that the local residents or local, you know, area residents would be using that site.
Well, thank you for that. First of all, the applicant has made the measures to meet the zoning code. That was our intent all along, to meet what the town requires. We have looked at the possibility of reducing. We have reduced some in our previous endeavors because it was even higher. We've taken those and into green space with pavers, green space pavers. The additional spaces reduction, we'd like to get a recommendation from the board. We believe that the numbers that are there are justified by virtue of who uses it and the coming from the residences to the building. We do not, and want to make it absolutely clear to this board, this is not a facility to serve outside interests of Jehovah's Witnesses. This is for the group that lives in Rivercrest. That's what the office building is for. That's what the recreation facilities are for. So it's not that we're going to bring in, as was commented tonight, busloads of people for soccer tournaments. It's just not what we do.
So, and I know you'd mentioned this, and you had done this, so you had reduced the parking, and I know you land banked some already.
Right.
I guess my question to the applicant would be, how many spaces would be needed to carry out the operations that are anticipated for the site? How far of a reduction would you need in order to achieve, I don't know if our consultants agree or disagree with, but I'd like to see how, do you need 60? Do you need 100? How many spaces do you truly need? And then we could talk about whether or not that could be reduced, but, you know, it's certainly a concern we have and a concern the public has that many spaces, why is it needed? And I know you've made the effort, but I'd like to maybe see what you're...
We'd be happy to, in our next submission, come back to you with a suggestion on what we might be able to accomplish. So if that's agreeable to you, we'll take that up in the next package.
All right, before we go to lighting, I'd like to just go down the line with the board here. Anybody have any additional comments or thoughts on the traffic and parking, anticipated other mitigation measures, or any other items that they want to talk about at this point?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I hear exactly what the applicant's saying about it's primarily going to be used for the people there. But my concern is always, well, what's going to happen in the future? Will that ever change? And if that thinking or that mindset that you have right now changes, then, you know, what's going to happen there? What will be the future impact of that? So it's just something that comes up, because it's one of those things, if it's there, at some point it could be utilized by other people. So just something to think about. And I don't know how, when we do our traffic studies, how we would actually project that.
Yeah, the answer is you really can't unless they're going to disclose at this point that they intend to change it at some point in the future.
Mm-hmm.
They have to base their study based on their statement of use.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, if I could comment on that as well. This evening, some questions were raised about a video facility, AV facility, or printing facilities. None of that is intended for this site anywhere that we know in the future. We are developing another AV site somewhere else. We have a printing facility in Wallkill. This is for the benefit of this family that lives there, that large group that lives there. It's to provide them the office space they need, medical as is shown on the drawings. So that is for that use and that use only. Now, can we guarantee what happens 20 years from now? I can't. But I can tell you that the intended use is as we've described it.
And also, as one of the members of the public raised, I mean, if it is intended for the local Rivercrest people, do you really need 250 parking lots? I mean, can you reduce it substantially? I mean,
We certainly will take that under
Okay,
advisement and come
Yeah.
back to you with some.
that was one of the questions the public
Yeah.
raised, yeah.
Yeah, if I could just make a suggestion, I believe early on in the process, you provided some kind of justification for the number of spots that you were proposing. I think it would be helpful if you put some kind of parking analysis table on the plan itself that pretty much, you know, spells out why you have the number of spots you have, where they're going to be, you know, who's going to be using them, peak events, that kind of thing. That's done often in many municipalities, and I think that would help not only the board, but the public if that were made part of the actual plan set.
Appreciate
Yeah.
the suggestion.
Yeah, and on that particular point, you know, the code does provide that a parking area can be reduced by 50% if it's, you know, acceptable to the applicant and to the board, where that area would be reserved for additional parking or construction of parking in the future. Basically, it would be land-banked parking. That's one option. But I also, if I may briefly touch on the comment that you had, Ravi, about the intended, the use. And while we don't know what happens in the future, we can kind of protect ourselves in the sense that, just similar to the Healy project, where I mentioned that I included a narrative regarding the limitation of the use. The use is limited to what the applicant is saying that they're going to use the property for. So if and when, you know, a project comes before you for approval, my suggestion would be to include that restriction there as well, so that if there is a substantial change in the future where use that's not contemplated now is being introduced at a later time, that could potentially have impacts, you know, or planning concerns, they may very well have to return to the board at that time.
So you mentioned a reduction of, by code of 50%. So if the applicant by chance, I'm throwing an arbitrary number out, thinks that they only needed 50 spaces, that would be more than 50% reduction, so that would not be,
Yeah, I think the current proposal is what, 247?
247.
246 spaces. You know, so 50% of that.
of the required.
Of that, but bear in mind, I don't think it's entirely up to the board to make that determination, because it also has to be acceptable to the applicant for their intended
Yeah, I guess I'd
use
just
of
like to
that
know,
area.
yeah, how far can
So,
they truly?
You know,
yeah.
you can't, it's not a unilateral decision, by the way, to, you know, to say whatever, it's this applicant or any commercial establishment to say, well, we're only gonna give you half the parking that you're asking for. So,
Yeah, thank you.
but it is an option that the code allows to make that reduction if it is agreeable to the applicant and makes sense for the board.
Okay. Yeah, we'd like to see what could potentially be done in terms of reduction.
Yeah, for the next meeting, if you can come up, for the next meeting, if you can come up with a number that you would like, some lower number.
We'll take a look at that.
I do have a question. In your earlier comments, you did mention that this facility would be primarily for the Rivercrest community, right?
That's correct.
And it's not the intent that to bring loads of people from outside, right?
That's correct.
Is there any way or mechanism that you thought about how to restrict that, or how to verify, validate that, like, I mean,
How to enforce it.
enforce it kind of thing? Like a gated community with a gate with passes only from the Rivercrest family to come in and use the facility, something like, I'm just putting it out, but
Well, hearing
are
some of
there
the
any
public
recommend-
comment about the restricted use of the site, just for our folks, it seemed like that wasn't a real popular view for consideration this evening either. So I don't know that I have an answer for you tonight, but we certainly can take a look at it for you.
Yeah, one of the public comment was about that, right? So they have a opinion that outside people may come in and start using the facility, but you said that it's only for Rivercrest family members.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and again, that can be part of your restriction
Right.
if, as to use, not only use of the building, but use of the site facilities as well, as Dominic has commented on. So that might be another way to manage that request.
Okay.
Lighting?
Yeah, I'd like to discuss lighting, please.
Sure. So, just to clear up a few things, some statements have been made in the public, by the public, for us, about us, relative to lighting. On the fields, ball field and soccer pitch, there can be no lighting provided. So, it is without light completely, okay? Want to make sure that that's understood. Also, the idea that we would have these lights on till 11 o'clock at night, that's not accurate as well. So what we have done is provided the cut sheets for high cutoff, low glare, dark sky compliant light fixtures for the parking areas. They have an automatic shut off in our organization at 10 o'clock and an automatic come on at 6 a.m. And then security lights that stay on in those parking areas. That's it. The tennis court and basketball court, they have lights on them. They are, that's a restricted use. Right now, according to the EAF, that was 6 to 9 for its usage.
I guess my question would be whether lighting for the tennis courts and basketball courts are needed. I mean, to have that happening after dark seems to be a concern of residents, so my question is whether that, we would even want to have lighting there, because that would encourage activity after sundown.
We would consider that dawn to dusk possibility, if you'd like to have that
I think
considered.
so. I mean, you heard the public comment tonight. I think anything that the applicant can do, but I think the idea of having lights on till 9 o'clock encourages activity on those surfaces till that hour, and, I think we would like to see that, not take place.
So is the board satisfied with the light fixtures, the comments about lighting that was requested previously?
I would ask I don't know, John, if you had a chance to review the.
Yeah, the lighting fixtures they're proposing are in compliance with what's typically being used in sites like these, not only in Fishkill, but in other municipalities that we work in throughout the Hudson Valley.
Okay,
And one further point on lighting.
please.
No lighting will be installed in the northernmost pavilions that are close to the northern property lines there. Those are also the pavilions that we discussed moving south and west, and there's no lighting in those.
Okay.
So, all right?
Yes, any other board comments on lighting? Okay, let's go to the next topic.
Very good. Noise was the other. The pavilions were commented on, the ball field, baseball field location and soccer pitch. We looked at all three of those for movement away from the property lines, because that's where the noise obviously is generated and was commented on very strongly tonight. So moving those facilities away from the neighbor's property line is our intent. We can turn them as well, so as to get the noisiest part of those functions, the goal areas, the plate area, further away, as was commented in our notes, away from the property lines. Additionally, we'll get into this on tree buffering, but part of what will help to reduce the noise is to get a tree buffer close to those activities. And that's part of our proposal as well.
Okay, have you considered any additional noise barriers? I know tree buffering is something, has noise barriers along along that property line been considered for additional reduction? I mean, tree buffer is certainly helpful, but I'd like to,
But the noise barriers that are typically done along highways, et cetera, are strongly viewed as eyesores. Along that property line where those folks live above us and looking down on those or try to get through those with a view, we think that that would be actually more offensive. We'd like to try to do it with as much natural material and approach as we possibly can. But again, we're open to what the board would want to offer as possible solutions as well. But building walls or barriers seems to us to be counterproductive.
and then there was another bullet here about hours of use for the fields. I didn't see any hours offered, but based on some of the comments received tonight, I 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., 9 a.m. to, I mean, the later in the morning, the better. I think there were some concerns about residents hearing activity as early as 6 a.m. I wouldn't want that. I don't think anybody wants that. So I'd like the applicant to suggest a time. I've thrown out a few. I think 10 a.m. would be great. 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. would be great. That'd be a good start. I just think 6 a.m. is, what's happening now is not, it wouldn't be acceptable to me, so.
So the comment earlier about a dawn to dusk kind of usage, how does the board feel about that?
Dawn is at 6 o'clock.
Dawn is 6,
I think 6 a.m. is
too early.
far too early.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even on a weekday, I try to sleep till 7, so. Not successful, but I try. But I wouldn't be happy with that if it were me living there. So I'd like to see, at least, I'll give you the opportunity, the applicant, the opportunity to make a suggestion, but 6 a.m. is,
Very good. We'll come back to you with a
yeah,
suggestion.
please.
Yeah, I would prefer something after 8, so 8 a.m. So.
All these folks who live in that community work in that community, so there'll be no time before work to use those facilities, which is currently what some of them do. So we'll have to look at the balance that we can bring to you, some balanced solution to that.
I think we're at the point where make a suggestion and we could talk about it. But I
Okay.
mean, there's no hours at this point. I'm just throwing out some
Sure.
hours and bringing up a comment, so.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
I don't think we have to go too deep on that, but it's
Okay.
certainly an item
Yeah.
for me. And then I think the next, before I do that, any other
No,
thoughts on that item?
no, you covered what I wanted to talk about.
And then the tree buffer was the next item.
So the tree buffer for noise control is obviously preferred if it's close in to those functions. So near and screening off the pavilions, some of the key areas in sports, some areas to the southeast where lights could project. All that would be part of the tree buffering. The idea that we could perhaps work with the town and the homeowners association to get those off of the cap, because right now, the only area that's not in a wetlands boundary or stream boundary is on the cap for those trees to be planted. The concern we have is that that exposes that cap to potential deterioration with the roots. So could we move those back up into the wooded areas that exist? We'd have to have cooperation and some planning with all of you and the residents as well, to provide what they would like to see and what would actually be performable.
I would advise the applicant to reach out to that board. We have no connection to that board. I would certainly advise that, and get their thoughts and maybe their willingness to work with you on a tree buffer. But I mean, I don't know that that's anything that we could.
I think
hold
some of that
anybody.
land you control, though, if I'm not mistaken.
What's that?
Some of the land on that wooded area is controlled by the town, some by the homeowners association. That's what I understood.
It's town, okay.
But nonetheless, if we can work together with those who control that land, we'd be willing to take a look at how that might better everybody's interest.
Yeah, if that's town property, then yeah, I would imagine communicating with the town board, I guess, would be the appropriate way to do. But yeah, I think approaching both the HOA and the town board about both would be very much appropriate and appreciated in consideration of this application. Now, the tree buffer and also the field orientations, those were not shown or reflected on the plans that were recently.
They will be. What we wanted to see, again, what the public would offer additionally
Understood.
relative to that, and then we would position that. And it would also take some adjustment in our site plan, especially if we did something with grading to provide berms at certain spots for the trees to be planted on, things like that.
Understood. Any other thoughts on that topic? We'll move on to zoning.
On the zoning, the indications are that we're within the, as of right, for zoning. We're trying to do everything we can to be good neighbors and comply as best we can with some of the concerns and interests that are justifiable by our neighbors. So we hope you see in us a willingness to try to do things that would mitigate some of the concerns that have been raised. We do want to provide accurate information regarding some things. Some statements have been made that really aren't where we are with this whole thing. The buses and competition on the fields, none of that is accurate. The lighting on the fields and all that takes place associated with that, none of that is accurate, and we've tied all that down with you tonight.
Any other thoughts or questions regarding the zoning from the board? All right, well, environmental is the next topic you had.
There's been some comments about the degradation of wetlands. Would like to again emphasize very clearly that all wetland boundaries have been remapped by us this spring, and all of those have been maintained. None of those will be violated by what we do. The cap is a very important piece of this, the environmental cap that's there, the 2-foot cap. We're very sensitive to that. We've had good management of that, even to the point where DEC now has allowed us to extend some of the monitoring from 1 year to 3 years. But we're very serious about doing what's in the best interest environmentally on that site, which, by the way, isn't an easy site, as you all know. And we did provide a history of the use of that site and the dates, the critical dates of when we came into the picture. I hope you get a chance to take a look at that. That's very revealing.
I think you kind of hit the wetlands and the
think so.
environmental in one. So anybody on the board have any thoughts or mitigation or concerns that they want to bring up at this point right now? Okay, so I appreciate you going through the memo. I know I'm going to highlight a few items that were brought up tonight. It's not meant to be all inclusive, but certainly items that, and some of these I think you may have mentioned that you were going to address. Accident records was something that came up.
That's good.
Question about pedestrian access to the Hudson River, access through the site. I know that was something that had come up. Question regarding anticipated frequency of vehicles to the site, which I think would be part of the traffic study. You've already touched on it, but if you can, in a memo, elaborate on the uses of the facilities, again, so that we can have a clear discussion of that and have that in a record.
Mr. Brozier, could I address one thing that I may have not said to you, to the board? The truck traffic that's there, nothing is going to change with that. We don't bring semis to that site on a regular basis. These are straight bodies and box trucks that go to Rivercrest that would now come to that location.
Could you provide some information at the next application of how frequent that is?
Sure.
That traffic is, because it is part of Jehovah's Witness, so it is.
Sure. Frequency of truck traffic to the site.
Today, yes, what's currently
Okay,
occurring.
very good.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, so I have a question,
Yes.
because I keep hearing it come up. You're saying the parking spaces are for the people who are in the complex there.
That's correct.
Are those individuals working somewhere else there, and that's why they need office space? Are they working out of their homes?
As many have done during this pandemic, many are working out of their homes, and our intent is to get them out of their homes and into office space and provide some of the things that we haven't been able to provide there at that complex. Medical, for instance, there's a small clubhouse there. On the property, Rivercrest property, that houses some of the a pantry and food areas that people can come and get food for consumption, and then those are going to move over to that location.
Okay, so essentially, because I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding, I want to understand, and I'm probably not the only one who's not understanding clearly.
Sure.
They're becoming a self-contained community, kind of, sort of? They get food there, they get their medical there, they work there, but now they're going to be working across the street.
That's an accurate statement, yes.
Okay.
On many of
so-
our complexes, it's a live-work environment.
Okay, so how would you prevent somebody, like, let's say me, I'm driving down the road and I want to continue, how, would you prevent me from going on that property? How would I be prevented from getting onto that property?
Any public road, we can't enforce
I'm
any
saying I'm
blockage
gonna
of that.
drive down and I'm gonna go right to where your park is, because I just moved to the community and I see this beautiful park and I want to go there. Is there gonna be a gate stopping me? Is there a turnaround to prevent me from going down there?
So there's a cul-de-sac at the end of Industrial Way.
I've been down there.
Off that cul-de-sac, we would come with our 2 driveways as has been delineated, and yes, there are gates at those locations.
Okay. I think if you perhaps made it a little more clear, because obviously there's a lot of concern with the general public in that vicinity. I think that might, either alleviate some concerns for citizens or perhaps bring up a couple of other areas where there might be a little further conversation
Okay.
to try
So,
to keep
like a clear-
everybody happy. This is a situation where
Okay.
it's tricky.
Yes, thank you. Maybe clear access to the river, things like that.
That was actually brought up.
Yeah,
That was
because,
brought up during the
yeah,
hearing.
we don't have any, that I'm aware of, any access to launch a boat that I'm aware of.
If I were living there, I would hope we wouldn't be opening it up for people to come launching boats down there, but
Across the tracks.
Yeah, I don't know where is there a place? I don't know. But-
I'm not sure we can accommodate that, but we'll certainly look at the comments that you're making, though. They're valid.
And I know public safety was one that was
Yeah.
a concern as well, so I'm not gonna, there were plenty of other items, and, I'd like to see, a follow-up memo, so we can
Sure.
talk about this further at the next meeting, and then also highlight some of the changes you've made as a result of our discussion tonight. I
Very
just
good.
think that's gonna be really important for us to get to a determination of significance here, of what the mitigation steps are. And the traffic study will be probably the cornerstone of that, but
Yeah.
certainly some of the other items are gonna be very important as well, so. I'm gonna go across the board. Any other items that we wanna discuss at this stage? I think there's no action that this board needs to take tonight.
No, sir.
I would suggest, maybe not this month, but at some point, we might want to do a site visit to
We would
kind of get
welcome
a
that.
feel for, because, public is talking about how close they are to certain areas, and it might be an idea to be able to see where everything's
would
going to be
certainly welcome that.
exactly.
Be happy to work with you if you can do it with, pardon my ignorance, but sunshine laws, I don't know if that creates some challenge for the board to come together, but if not, we would certainly be happy to host you there and take you anywhere you want to go
I
and
think
let
at
you see
this-
what you got to see.
At this point, perhaps at the next meeting, you offer some suggested times for us, usually Saturday mornings are when we do, we've done previous site visits, so you suggest
well, We'll look at it for the next meeting.
I think I would ask the applicant to provide some dates where that would be appropriate. To
Be
put
happy
them
to.
on the spot tonight would.
No, I'm not
But I
asking
think,
for anything.
at the
tonight.
next meeting, to have them offer a date or two, preferably a Saturday morning where our board can walk the
I
site.
sleep in on Saturday mornings sometimes.
I hear you guys up at 6.
Yeah. There you go.
Very good. We'll make some suggestions.
I can bring my hog.
Okay. I think that's all for us on this item tonight.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.